This is a topic very close to my heart and one I have dealt with on numerous occasions: universal health care. This is a constant topic up for debate in American politics. While the left promises universal health care, with some limitations, of course, the right claims it is socialism, and socialism is, of course, Nazism. There are so many points to argue in that last claim, but it could be a video in and of itself. What is not considered is the overall welfare of the citizenry. As my personal experiences come from living in America and Germany, I think the best way to look at this issue is first with a parallel history of healthcare in both countries. But when to begin? The United States was not an independent nation until the end of the 18th century. Germany was not a unified nation until about 100 years later in 1871. Since this is when both nations were officially independent, unified nations, this is a good point to look at medical care. Plus, the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century changed how and where humanity lived, so it is better to look at medical care after the beginning of the modern world. In 1871, both countries were pretty similar in what type of care was offered. If one was wealthy, they could afford personal physicians. Maybe the medical knowledge was limited compared to today, but at least there was some care and knowledge. The poor often had to go without effective medicines or treatments. The average worker was massively underpaid, and any care was simply too expensive. It was difficult enough to manage food and lodgings. Human labor was cheap and plentiful, so expendable. If someone was injured at work, they were fired. A new worker was brought right in. Meanwhile, the injured, unemployed individual was forced to find other work, often at lower pay, beg, engage in crime, or worst case scenario, turn to a workhouse. Seen as very Dickensian, workhouses were not simply a British invention. The Americans and Germans had their own versions. All were equally horrible. End result? There was certainly no universal health care, not by a long shot. So how do we get to where we are now? In Germany in 1883, this man happened. Otto von Bismarck was the German chancellor from 1871 after unification until 1890. While he came from landed nobility, which increased their riches off the labor of peasants, von Bismarck realized there was something inherently wrong with abandoning the poor to a miserable existence after years of industrious labor simply because they fell ill or were injured. Instead, there should be some form of protection. Please do not misunderstand. Von Bismarck was by no means a socialist. In fact, he did not support most workplace reforms, for fear industry and the economy would be negatively impacted. Von Bismarck was a capitalist, as most leaders from his generation were. What he did do was promise and pass two important bills from 1883 to 1884. The Sickness Insurance Law of 1883 forced employers to contribute to medical costs for their employees. The costs were shared by the employee, and only 1/3 of medical costs were covered by employers for up to 13 weeks. This may not have completely alleviated financial woes for sick employees, but now they had to cover 1/3 less of their medical costs. In 1884, the accident insurance law was passed. This would be close to what most Americans would call workers' comp. After 13 weeks of sick pay was covered by the employer and employee, the government stepped in to help cover costs if the worker was deemed disabled and unable to work any longer. The government then paid for medical care and up to 2/3 of the employee's wages as a pension. Government-regulated healthcare began to gain momentum in the early 1900s. Initially, obligatory health insurance was for laborers. By 1914, most workers were covered by public health insurance. This included members from all walks of life, including farmers, servants, office workers, and even lawyers. Those who were not covered on the public plan could already buy private insurance. Family members who were not working, like housewives and children, were covered by 1930, and retirees were enrolled by 1941. In 2009, Germany mandated that everyone in the country must be covered by some form of medical insurance. If someone was a legal resident, they must be covered. That means that not only citizens or foreigners who were employed, residents had to be covered. If someone came from abroad and was a retiree or a student, they also had to be covered to maintain their legal residency status. This could be through public or private insurance. This is not so difficult to manage. It's simply a matter of signing up for a local health insurance. There are no restrictions such as pre-existing conditions which preclude a person from obtaining insurance. The fees are also based on a person's income and not a flat rate. As a side note, this is so ingrained in the German psyche now that I had a difficult time when I first transitioned to the German system. Initially, I was in Germany working for the US Armed Forces as a civilian support employee. Since my positions were not full-time, I was not insured. This was while working for the US government. Employees overseas were not held to the same regulations as stateside employees. So the few times I went to the doctor, I was not allowed to see a doctor on the military base. Instead, I had to go to a German doctor and pay for any treatment completely out of pocket. Toward the end of my employment with the government, I was allowed to opt for insurance, but I made just over minimum wage and could not afford it. I married my German boyfriend a year after I left the American system. Then I applied for a German visa. My husband put me on his health insurance, but we had to get a special exception. When I applied, they needed my old health insurance information. When I explained I had no health insurance for about 5 years, the German office could not accept my word. I was constantly told that everyone legally had to have health insurance. It was impossible. It took a lot of explaining that I had been in Germany with the US military and fell under a different status, which did not provide health insurance. Finally, a note was made and I was placed on the insurance. But I digress. What was America doing at this time? How did their social system compare? Workers went on strike in the late 1800s to protest unsafe working conditions. Very often, strikes were broken up and strikers were usually fired from their jobs, since laborers were in abundance and employees could easily be replaced. Initially, workers were allowed to sue their employers if they were injured at the workplace. The responsibility fell on the employee to prove the injury was through no fault of their own, and the sole blame was on the employer. Considering most workers who were inclined to get seriously injured were poor laborers, this was not an affordable option, and many did not take their cases to court. Some workers band together and created social groups that raised money, so when someone was injured or died on the job, but there was no legislation to force the employer to contribute. Some states attempted to create employer liability acts, and the first one was enacted in 1889 for federal employees. For railroad employees injured or killed at work, there was the potential for monetary compensation. However, the workers still had to prove the company's negligence caused the injury. This was rarely proven. Ives versus South Buffalo Railway Company in 1911 repealed the railroad workers' protection. Ives sued the employer after he was injured at work for the South Buffalo Railway Company. It was proven he was at fault, but the law demanded the employer was always liable for any injuries. When the railway appealed, the court decided the law was unfair and repealed it. Thus, the employer was not liable for any financial compensation. The statute, judged by our common law standards, is plainly revolutionary. Its central and controlling feature is that every employer who is engaged in any of the classified industries shall be liable for any injury to a workman arising out of and in the course of the employment by a necessary risk or danger of the employment or one inherent in the nature thereof. This may seem fair to us now. After all, why should a business pay for something which was not their fault? What does not sit well with us today is there was no help in the case of injury. Mistakes happen, but employees were completely on their own if injured. Only after various incidents did more legislation begin to pass protecting workers, like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. Female workers were regularly locked in the building to prevent them from taking unapproved breaks. When a fire broke out, most of the employees died. However, this was worker safety, not universal health care. The end result was no health care completely mandated by the federal government. Instead, after the Stabilization Act of 1942 attempted to stabilize wages, which caused companies to offer various healthcare benefits to attract potential employees. President Truman tried to push for federal coverage, but even back then it was condemned by some as socialist. Medicaid is available to those with low enough income, but the majority of the population is ineligible. One of the main insurance providers in America, Blue Cross, was formed in 1929. The original plan was conceived that teachers would pay $6 per year to guarantee 21 days of hospital care. This was later offered to people in other occupations. This provider, along with numerous others, have grown over the last 100 years to be an incredibly large industry. Based on revenue, the health and medical insurance sector has the 5th largest revenue at over $1.2 billion. They're only beat out by pharmaceutical industry, drug, cosmetic, and toiletry industry, and hospitals. The top 4 industries in the United States all have to do with health. If the health industry is so profitable in America, why are people going into medical debt? Why is everyone not insured? In 2022, approximately 9.9% of the population was uninsured. This is about 27 million people. To put that in perspective, that is a little less than the population of Texas. Compare that to Germany, where less than 1% of the population is uninsured. There are an estimated 143,000 without health insurance. Most of them are self-employed, unemployed, or homeless and simply fall through the cracks in terms of paying for insurance. That said, unemployed residents are automatically eligible for fully funded health insurance. The problem is when people do not sign up for it. What does health insurance cover in Germany versus the United States? Since we use AOK, I'll look at their insurance plan. AOK covers about 37% of the population and is a public health care insurance. It covers about 27 million people, the same amount who are currently uninsured in America. Since Blue Cross Blue Shield covers about 34% of Americans, a similar percentage, I'll use them for the American comparison. I keyed in a New Jersey zip code based on where I grew up and am using plans available throughout the entire state. First, there is the monthly cost. AOK charges 14.6% of an employee's gross pay. This is capped at about 58,000 euros per year. That means if an employee earns more than 397,600 euros per year, they do not pay more for their health insurance. Granted, this is only a small percentage of the population, and after a person earns about 70,000 euros per year, they have the option of transferring to private health insurance. Also, the employer is responsible for half that cost. So the employee is only paying 7.3% of their pay for insurance. There are not various plans available to those covered. It is a set plan no matter who is insured. As for medication, of course, over-the-counter medications are not covered. Prescription, however, in general, the EU has worked to keep the cost of medicine lower than what people experience in the US. In addition, AOK has a limit of a 10% copay on any medication that is not exempt from copays. There is also a limit to the copay of 10 euros. So for a drug costing 50 euros, we have to pay 5 euros. If it costs 100 euros, we have to pay 10 euros. If it costs 130 euros, we are capped out at 10 euros and pay 10 euros. As for those exempt from copays, the current list holds a little over 4,000 medicines which do not even charge the copay. In addition, any medication for children or related to pregnancy and childbirths, always free, period. When I looked up what medicines have to be paid in full, AOK again stated non-prescription medicines must be paid. However, with the exception if those medicines are used for treating a serious illness, then AOK will pay anyhow. As for preventative care, in terms of helping live a better life, AOK does offer 2 free courses per year to its members. The courses generally meet weekly for 8 weeks and include options like yoga, cooking healthy, and various fitness courses. Participants get to choose which 2 courses they would like to join. Blue Cross Blue Shield has different plans with different costs. Not all were clearly outlined online, so I had to search around a bit and settled on Braven Health, which is one of the branches of Blue Cross Blue Shield. I went with the Braven Medicare Plus plan, which does not have a monthly premium at the lower levels. Looking comparably, what does Braven cover? For a start, the first thing which catches my eye is the maximum annual out-of-pocket responsibility. It is currently capped at $6,500 for services from in-network providers. Moving down the list, there is a copay charge of $325 per day for the first 5 days in the hospital. From the 6th day, the hospital stay is fully covered. As an outpatient, there is always a copay of $250. Primary care physicians never charge a copay, okay? However, any visit to a specialist will cost $20. Fortunately, there are various preventative services like vaccines and screenings which are fully covered. Trips to the emergency room have a $30 copay. If an ambulance is needed, there is a $250 copay for the transportation. While screenings and tests are free, other services may not be. If one needs a CT scan or an MRI, there is a $40 copay when seen at an office or private business. If seen at a hospital, the copay is $150. In the case of x-rays, they're free at an office and charge $30 anywhere else. The various imaging services are a mix of free or different copays, so it depends on what is needed and where the patient is seen. As for medical costs, it all depends on what drugs are used. According to Braven's plan, for a standard 1-month supply, it ranges from free for preferred generic medicines to $100 or 30% of the drug's costs for non-preferred or specialty drugs. Something interesting was the coverage gap. After one is paid $4,660 for their yearly medication, one has to pay 25% of the medicine's costs until $7,400 is paid. After that, the cost is capped at either 5% or the cost of copays of either $415 or $1035, depending on the drug. In the case of over-the-counter drugs, there is a $70 to $250 fund honored at participating retailers. If any medical equipment is needed, 20% of the cost is covered by the patient. The exception being anything diabetes related. Outpatient surgery, only a $250 copay. There are a few preventative options through Braven as well. Members get $200 per year to put toward gym membership or the purchase of home gym equipment. They are also eligible for $275 per year for various dietary programs like Weight Watchers, which is not the majority of your costs, but okay. In this video, I am only looking at standard issues that may arise medically. I have not looked at mental health or any extra services like dental care, eyewear. While the costs may not sound that high for the American medical insurance, it can add up pretty quickly for those on tight budgets. It is wonderful that in theory, those who are not eligible for insurance through their jobs can be covered. However, it does not mean medical care is affordable. Let's look at the average minimum wage worker who works less than 30 hours per week, so the company is not responsible for providing medical insurance. When the worker is young and healthy, there are no issues. Meet Joe, our model for a young, healthy, minimum wage American employee. While the federal minimum wage is still only $7.25 per hour, we're looking at New Jersey medical insurance. So the New Jersey minimum wage is currently $14.13 per hour, almost double the average federal minimum wage. By 2024, it is supposed to reach $15 per hour. So to keep the math simple, we'll work off the premise that Joe earns $15 per hour. As of 2016, companies must offer medical coverage for anyone who works an average of 30 hours or more per week. So Joe is limited to 29 hours per week. That means his pay before taxes is $1,740 per month. About $222 is taken out for income tax. So take-home pay is $1,518 per month. That already sounds awfully low, but let's factor in what Joe is probably paying for rent and food. On the cheap side, there are apartments for rent for about $400 per month for 2 bedrooms. So let's say Joe has a roommate to cover the costs. Then they each pay about $200 per month for their lodgings. Not bad. For that 2-bedroom apartment, utilities probably cost Joe about $70 for his half. He's young, he's happy to eat cheaply, so he's probably managing about $200 per month on food. He does need to get to his job, so he is taking public transport. We can keep his costs to around $200 per month. A monthly bus pass is valid for between 2 stations, so we are adding a little bit extra for other stops our worker may make outside work hours. So far, his expenses total about $670 per month. Factoring in some extra costs per month for phone and internet, we'll raise this to $750. Fortunately, that is less than half his take-home pay. That means there is still a fair amount he could spend on activities. He can visit with friends at the bar or go on a date at a restaurant. He can afford to pop by the beach on a hot day, no problem. But what about when he gets sick? Now, we're not going to go overboard and we'll keep it something simple. Our guy, he's partying at the shore at the boardwalk and he fell off the pier and he broke his leg. Not fun, but hey, something he can easily recover from with some time. In fact, about 8 weeks to be precise. Since he was at the pier, Joe was popped in an ambulance, which cost him that $250. This is not simply a sprain that can be wrapped and sent home, so Joe is stuck with an outpatient fee of $250 while the medical staff works on him. Another $30 for the x-rays to check the leg. Fortunately, it's a simple closed fracture, so nothing more is needed. On the cheap, crutches will cost about $30. Fortunately, Joe has a friend to drive him home, so he does not need to worry about any transportation costs. If the pain is not too bad, then Tylenol will do just fine and is only a few bucks for a bottle. That party just cost our guy a little over $500. Okay, after all, his monthly expenses are paid, he can make it through. But what about the next 2 months? Now, the law mandates that a person is qualified for 1 hour of sick leave for every 30 hours they've worked. This maxes out at 40 hours per year. Joe is usually healthy and does not take off time normally, so we'll give him his 40 hours of paid sick leave. That will cover a little under 2 weeks of work. However, it takes about 8 weeks to get out of that cast on his leg. So he will now miss out on about 192 hours of work pay. After taxes, that would be about $2,500. That $500 in medical cost is sorely needed just to survive. Hopefully he has some savings to pull from or people he can rely on to help with expenses. Let's take the same scenario and apply it to our German guy, Hans. Currently, the federal minimum wage is 12 euros per hour, about $13.50, so a little lower than what Joe earns in New Jersey. Germany has the same rule that if one works under 30 hours, they're part-time. Before taxes, Hans makes 1,392 euros per month. After taxes, take-home pay is 1,097 euros per month, so a little over $1,200. Again, a little lower than what our American makes. Again, he has a roommate, so he's paying about 250 euros for a shared apartment on the cheap. With shared utilities, Hans is looking at about another 150 euros. Food is actually cheaper than in the US and will cost about 150 euros per month. Germany has a deal where a nationwide public transport pass costs 49 euros. This is with unlimited stops, so transport to and from work is a lot better. Hans does have to pay a monthly health insurance cost, and based on his income, he's looking at about 130 euros. So his monthly expenses will be about 730 euros. Again, a little higher than Joe, and now his leftover money is about 370 euros. Here's where the benefit comes in. Hans has been partying too hard at the Weinfest and fell off the terrace and broke his leg. The ambulance has been called and he's rushed to the hospital. That ambulance fee just cost nothing. Sorry, it was covered by insurance. Okay, still, he has to go get x-rays and have his leg set in a cast. This rings up to nothing. It seems this was also covered by the insurance. The crutches also cost nothing. Depending on where he gets them from, he may have to bring them back when he is finished with them. If the doctor prescribes him pain medication, it will cap off at 10 euros for the month. Again, he has a friend who can give him a ride home, so he pays nothing for extra transport, but it would not have cost him anything anyhow because he already has the unlimited use ticket, so oh well. Thus, his medical costs just rang up to a whopping 10 euros. Now he is also a minimum wage worker who tends to live from paycheck to paycheck. Legs don't heal any quicker in Germany than in America, so he's out of work for 8 weeks. This means he cannot earn his normal wages. Except Germany has a system in place for sick days, unlike what America has. Under normal circumstances, one is not limited to only 40 hours of paid sick leave per year. Instead, with a viable doctor's note, there's no limit to sick leave. For normal illnesses, one could miss 30 days per year over the course of 12 months and still get fully paid. Since our guy is a part-time worker and has a legitimate issue clearly covered in a doctor's note, he's entitled to full paid sick leave for 6 weeks. Those last 2 weeks, he makes 70% of his wages. Only the health insurance pays his wages instead of his employer. So for those 8 weeks while suffering cabin fever, our guy still gets most of his income. So the financial loss will still be felt in those last 2 weeks, but it's manageable. There is no real concern about no longer affording rent and basic necessities. Yes, Hans is paying into the system monthly, and when healthy, that is a higher expense. But when something happens, the benefits are very clear. Yes, these were hypothetical situations. For real-life ones, I have a good friend, his girlfriend many years ago, her son had an emergency and was airlifted to a hospital. The whole event cost the girlfriend nothing. It was completely covered by public health insurance. Okay, that one could be hearsay. How about something a little more personal? My husband gets regular medication for a small issue, and it costs about 10 euros for a 3-month supply. One of my children ended up cracking his neck wrong at school, and they panicked and rushed him to the hospital in an ambulance. He got x-rays and a full exam, and it cost us literally nothing. Everything was completely covered by the insurance. We even got a freaky picture out of it. The doctor, per request, was able to print a copy of a skeleton to take home, which to this day we still have. It is so creepy looking. Okay, the end result. For your own sake, push your state and federal politicians for better healthcare. And me, I already sleep pretty easily knowing we're fully covered by our insurance. In fact, I just saw the new health courses are listed, so I think I'll go see what my husband and I should sign up for. Heck, it's free after all.